Good evening. I thought you were all on the way home. Well, it's the last evening, isn't it, of our month's work. And it's time to express gratitude, thanks, appreciation for the wonderful work that our workers have done in keeping this work harmonious and peaceful. We haven't lost any of our guests along the way. No broken bones. It's been a joyous experience. And I know that it's been joyous for many of those who have attended this work, although it has been very difficult for some who have had to drink this in morning and night. Let me assure you that this work this month is the deepest that we have ever had in the message of the infinite way, and that the work has been carried forward a step further than we have ever had it. Also, that this work this month has opened up that which I have been trying to bring out for several years. Some years ago in Portland and Seattle, I said to the students that I hoped eventually to be able to show them the healing work without mental argument, without the use of treatment, as treatment is ordinarily understood in metaphysics. And ever since then, I've been trying to make it clear how this is done. The reason for this is that it is the only way I myself know of carrying on healing work. I have never at any time in my life used treatment. I have never at any time used mental argument, affirmation or denial or knowing the truth. My own work has been carried on entirely through retiring into the silence and waiting there until that inner impulsion came, that either still small voice or the deep breath, or that release that sort of said God is on the field and all is well, or an inner assurance of well-being. That is all that I knew about the healing work when I came into the practice, and I have studied the letter of truth as a help toward teaching. I have found that when students didn't know the correct letter of truth, that they quickly got into the habit of believing that there was a God going to do some healing work, that there was a God going to work through some holy man or woman to do something that God wouldn't do for someone else. I have had people actually tell me that they thought God would heal through Christian Science, or God would heal through unity, or God would heal through the infinite way, whereas God wouldn't heal through the Catholic Church or the Protestant Church or the Hebrew Church, and that just can't be possible, can it? And yet, very few healings do take place through the Catholic Church or Protestant Church or Hebrew Church, certainly not in proportion to those that take place through the metaphysical movements. And so there must be an answer. It can't be that a God favors one over another. And so in studying the letter of truth, I came upon that principle of God as one. And that the reason that we suffer from these sins, diseases, and deaths is that we have accepted a universal belief that there is a cause for disease. In the material medical world, there is a material cause for disease. In the metaphysical world, it's a mental cause for disease. But in either case, the belief that there's a cause for disease is enough to perpetuate it. Whereas the truth is, if there is only one power, there cannot be such a thing as a negative power or a power to cause sin or to cause disease. And so it was that one step led to another, first revealing that the statement that God is all is inadequate, doesn't cover the ground. God is not only all, but God is the only. And that absolutely eliminates any possibility of anybody discovering a healing process. Since in that infinity of God, one cannot take cognizance of that which has no existence. Then you come to the fact that, but there is disease, there is sin, there are hospitals and there are cemeteries. And these are hard facts. And so you have to come to the second step to find out the nature of that which is appearing to you, which the world has called sin and disease, but which you now know cannot be sin and disease, and in that you find the nature of error. And when you have discovered the nature of error, you no longer battle it, you no longer war against it, you no longer fight it, you no longer find a cause for it, and you no longer find a cure for it. And so you have the two major points in the message of the infinite way: the nature of God, the nature of error. And when you have those two, then you can begin to formulate all of the treatments you want, when you realize that the treatment is not aimed at curing anything or anybody, but lifting you yourself into an atmosphere where the realization dawns of spiritual harmony. Then you can use all the treatment you like that will be based on God as one, that will be based on recognizing the nature of anything that appears in an erroneous form to be almost anything you want except error itself. And then you will find yourself in an atmosphere where from within will come the assurance of God's allness, omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience. Well, you see that with that as a foundation, it is only another step to the realization that there is a human world misguided, stumbling into one form of error after another, and never able to extricate itself, except temporarily at times, always rushing onward toward destruction, and you perceive that it is the material concept of the universe that is destroying man. Not a material universe, there isn't one. Not a mental universe, there isn't one. But the material and the mental concepts of the universe that man entertains. These are his destruction. And you find that this material sense always operates through the word I. It never appears in any other form than I. I need this, I require this, I have this or I haven't this, I long for this, I miss this. Always this word I is appearing negatively to hold us in its grasp, or very mistakenly it appears positively and says, oh yes, I am healthy or I am wealthy, and then sooner or later it comes along and finds that I am not that at all. In other words, the personal sense of I, claiming either to be something, have something, or do something, or the personal sense of I claiming that it can't do something or hasn't something, this personal sense of I constitutes material sense. And this personal sense of I is always acquiring, achieving, attaining. Once this is perceived, it quickly appears that that is not a part of God's universe, never was and never can be. And that all of these truths of Scripture, such as we had here this morning, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, all this begins to appear. My kingdom is not of this world. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. We begin to perceive that there is a spiritual presence and a spiritual power, and in that we lose this personal sense of I, and harmony, the spiritual harmony, begins to appear. Now the strange thing is, we remain the same person in appearance that we always were, except often with an improved appearance of health or body or purse. But actually the lives we live are the same. We live in homes, we eat food, we drink drinks, we enjoy vacations, we enjoy work. Outwardly we're the same person, but inwardly the difference is that instead of living by might or by power, instead of living by fear, instead of living by force and by energy, we are now living by grace. There is something else taken over in our experience that goes before us to make the crooked places straight. It goes before us to arrange the details of our existence. It really acts as a cement in our relationships, a cement of love, a bond, a tie with all those with whom we come in contact. And so it is that this spiritual sense appears to us, and in that we see why the treatment isn't necessary for healing, since actually no healing can take place. Now, what is it that dispels this illusory sense, this material sense that appears to us as forms of sin, disease, lack, limitation? What is it that dissolves all of these appearances? What is it that dissolves material sense? Now the answer is this, and hear it well. It is this spiritual essence or substance or law that appears to us, that comes to us from the withinness. It is a presence or power, if you'd like to call it that. At any rate, it is a something that becomes tangible to us when our human thought has stopped, when we no longer have opinions, when we no longer have wishes or desires, when we can sit, regardless of the form of sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation that's appearing to us, when we can sit and inwardly listen or attune ourselves or be receptive and wait until that emanation comes from within us. Call it by whatever name you will. When that comes, you will find that you can call it the name that Paul called it, the Christ. I can do all things through Christ. Or, I live, yet not I, Christ liveth my life. You may call it Christ if you like, so that when you sit quietly, listen, are receptive, you will find that something deeper than yourself, greater than yourself, will flow out into visible expression, audible expression. And it then will do what we call healing work. Now, it doesn't do healing work. What it does is dissolve material sense. That's what it does. It dissolves material sense. And when there is no material sense, there is no personal sense of I to sin or be sick or to be poor. Only I can be rich or poor. Only I can be sick or well. Only I could be happy or unhappy. But when there's no longer any I, now what have you got left? God. God manifesting itself as the Son. God the Father appearing as God the Son. Do you see that? No personal sense of I left there. It's God the Father appearing as God the Son. What hid it? Material sense. What covered it up? Material sense. They call it the veil of illusion. It's material sense. And you can't dissolve it physically, and you can't dissolve it mentally. You can only dissolve it if you can bring to conscious expression that inner thing that Paul called Christ. Now, you don't have to use that term if you don't like. Jesus had another one. He called it the Father within. I can of my own self do nothing. The Father within me, he doeth the works. So if you like, you can call that inner feeling, that inner at-one-ment, that inner peace, the Father. If that doesn't mean anything to you, there is another Hebrew term, Emmanuel. And Emmanuel means God with us. Now, the very moment that you have this deep breath, the very moment that you have this inner release, that is the sign of Emmanuel, or God with us. You can know by that God is with us, within, closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. You often hear it said, oh, trust God, believe in God, leave it to God. Don't make the mistake of doing that at all, unless you have some assurance of God's presence. And the only way you can have the assurance is actually to have Emmanuel, the feeling of God's presence, the realization, the awareness, the consciousness. And that comes to you in the stillness. In quietness and in confidence shall be thy strength. In quietness and confidence. In the still small voice. The hearing of the ear. Do you have ears and do not hear? Do you have eyes and do not see? Well, close the outer ear and close the outer eye, and watch how the inner ear and the inner eye opens, and all of a sudden you say, oh, now I see. And you don't see it all. It really means, now I understand. Now I feel. Now I am aware. The inner eye is open. The inner ear is open. Now then, to heal without mental argument means to be able to sit quietly in that receptive state, which we now call meditation, and wait patiently for the voice to speak, or that feeling to come, or that deep breath. And with the coming, you have the assurance that God is on the field. Now, it may be necessary to know the truth consciously, to speak it to yourself, to think it, in order to lift yourself to a place where you don't have to think and don't have to speak, but can be still. Later on, that isn't necessary. Later on, after one has made that contact often enough, one lives in it so completely that it is necessary only to close the eyes and almost instantly be at the center of being. Sometimes it isn't necessary to close the eyes at all. One can make the shift from their outer senses to their inner awareness, even while driving the automobile. As a matter of fact, one of the most outstanding healings that I have ever witnessed took place while I was in a moving picture theater looking at a movie. It happened that for many, many weeks I had promised a couple of children that I would take them to the movies. And week after week I had to postpone it because somebody was too sick and I had to sit and give treatments. And week after week this took place until these children really believed that I never was going to take them to the movie, that wasn't going to happen. And so the day finally came when all was well, and it was a Saturday, and I said, now we're all clear, we're going to the movie, and to make sure that no one finds us, we're going to our favorite little restaurant way downtown, a tiny little delicatessen restaurant, and nobody will find us there, and we'll go right across the street from there to the movies. And just as we got up to go out and pay our check, in came running a lady, I'm looking for you, I'm looking for you. Something told me to come here. Hurry, my brother's dying. Well, the children just looked at me. And I said, it's all right. I'm sure the brother isn't going to die at least till after the movie, so we're going to the movie just the same. And we did. We went to the movie. And as I sat there, presumably watching the movie, this inner peace came, this being at the center of being, and actually what took place with that man was one of the miracles that I have witnessed in this work. So that going to the movie didn't prevent God operating, nor did it prevent my coming into at one-ment with it. Now from that day to this, I have witnessed many such occasions when it made no difference what the outer circumstances were. Once up in Boston, I was in a theater, called upon to do some work, and went down to the men's washroom, sat there with my eyes closed, getting into this piece, and a couple of sailors passed by, says, look at that fellow, drunk already. You see, there is such a thing as living about 3/4 in this mood or atmosphere all of the time. and only rarely being pulled out of it when you get good and mad at somebody. Then you have to work your way back in. But otherwise, this is a fairly continual state to the student who has been on the path a while, and it's a very easy thing to shift from the outer senses to that inner stillness and get the click, and that click does the work. Now then, as a result of the work that we have done here the past 3 weeks, I am sure that there will be at least a dozen or more of us who will be able to do our healing work without mental argument, because these 3 weeks' work have brought to light something that never before was as clear as it is now, and that is that the secret of healing, or of all demonstration, is Christ realized. Not just Christ and not just God. God realized. Christ realized. It isn't what you know or what you think or what you read that does the work. It is an actual realization. It is an actual feeling within of the presence and power of God immediately with us and on the field. And I think that as our students realize this, I mustn't expect too much of any treatment. I mustn't expect too much of any work that I do, except in proportion as there is Christ realized, God realized, the presence of God felt, Emmanuel known. Then you have the right to expect manna to fall from the sky if it has to appear in that way. You have the right to see the lame walk, the deaf hear, the blind open their eyes. You have the right to see the dying get to their feet. Because is there anything beyond the realm of God? And the answer is no. Nothing is impossible to God. God can set a table in the wilderness. But you see, in this case, it is definitely God. It isn't your understanding. It isn't mine. It isn't treatment. It isn't cleverly worded statements. It isn't vain repetitions carried on over a long period of time. Now you make the acknowledgement, nothing's impossible to God, but I have to be sure that God is on the field. That is my function, to bring about the realization of God. This brings about the demonstration of God. Now watch this point. You're not expecting healing or supplying. All you're expecting is God realization. This in and of itself takes form. You have nothing to do with that. You have nothing to do with the healing. You have nothing to do with supplying. You have nothing to do with companionships or employments or homes or raising from the dead. You have nothing to do with that. You will never succeed if you try those things. You can only succeed in one thing: realizing God, realizing Christ. If you do that, the realized Christ will be the Savior unto any and every situation. Don't try to heal anyone. Don't try to supply them. Don't try to employ them. Don't try to get companions for them or parking spaces or transportation. Try only with every call to attain an inner realization of God, and then let that do the work. And it may do it in a far different way than you could ever outline. Certainly it will do it in a far better way than you could ever plan. Now, we don't know the ways of God, and certainly the ways of God knows nothing about our stupid meanderings. But when we stop taking thought for reducing fevers or reducing lumps or knitting bones when we stop taking thought for getting employment or bringing peace on earth, and give our whole life's devotion to attaining Emmanuel, God with us, a realization of Christ, watch this, miracles follow. Miracles of grace follow. If necessary, manna will fall from the sky. If necessary, water will flow from the rock. If necessary, the waters will divide. Nothing is impossible to God. But all these things are impossible to you or me, regardless of our understanding or our spirituality or our morality or any other thing. All of these things are impossible to us. But none of them is impossible to God. So bring God to the field. Now, when you know this, do you not see how the mental argument disappears? Because you say, what difference now, what kind of statements I make or anything else? I'm not dealing with a physical cause of disease or a mental cause of disease, nor am I dealing with the getting rid of disease. I am dealing with the attainment of a spiritual consciousness which, when realized, dissolves material sense. Now, all sin, all disease, all lack, all limitation, all wars are forms of material sense. When you destroy material sense, you have no substance out of which those forms can appear. That's the spiritual secret. That's the secret of spiritual healing. That is the secret, really, of spiritual living, because there comes a time when you're no longer concerned with healing. You're concerned only. You see, the healing part is only in the beginning, while we still have mental, moral, physical, and financial discords. But after some degree of this Christ realization, most of our human errors fade from us, and from then on we take no thought about them and live merely to experience this realized Christ, if necessary, 1 or 2 dozen times a day, and then letting the realized Christ live our lives for us, attract to us the persons, things, circumstances, and conditions necessary to our unfoldment. We don't do it. We don't take thought for it. We don't try to attract customers to our business, patients or students to our ministry. We attract to us only an inner realization of God's presence, and then we let that unfold as it will. And we will literally find it true, all things are added unto us by grace, not by might, nor by power, not by your effort, not by your thoughts. Your thoughts are not my thoughts. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Oh no, God's thoughts, when they touch us, the earth melteth. He uttereth his voice, the earth melteth. The earth means error, form, discord. Any form of discord is embraced in that word earth, in that sense. He uttereth his voice, the earth melteth. And what is left when the earth melteth? Himself, spirit. Spirit formed, spirit manifested. Material sense is gone, melted, dissolved, when he uttereth his voice. So there, it becomes our function, whether we accomplish it in this next month or whether it takes us a century. Let us remember our goal. The goal is that we hear this voice uttered within us. That's our goal. When that voice utters itself in Jesus Christ, all error is dissolved before him. When that voice utters itself in the disciples of Jesus Christ, all error melts before him. When that voice utters itself in the consciousness of any individual on the face of the globe, evil cannot stand before it, because evil is only a form of material sense. And how do you know what the nature of error is? Material sense appearing as form. Now, there's no use trying to get rid of forms. Don't try to get rid of sin or sinners. Don't try to get rid of disease. Don't try to get rid of lack or limitation. Those are only the decoys. Those are the forms which error assumes. But error is material sense. And the only thing that dissolves material sense is spiritual consciousness, the voice, the divine presence, Emmanuel, God with us, Tao, Brahm, call it what you will. It is God in action. And when you have God in action in your consciousness, material sense is dissolved. When it's dissolved, its forms disappear. It is just like you have seen in restaurant windows. Great big pieces of ice formed as birds, as eagles, as rocks. Great big pieces of ice carved into wonderful forms of fish, animals. And what happens when the ice melts? All the animals and fish disappear. And so it is, all of our evil is nothing more nor less than a block of ice called material sense, and nothing is going to dissolve it except the voice, except the presence of God, except a realization of Emmanuel, except the realization of God's presence. And when you have that, material sense is dissolved. When that's dissolved, false appetite disappears. False desires disappear. Lonesomeness disappears. Homelessness disappears. Lack and limitation, even wars disappear. Even disputes between capital and labor disappears when material sense is dissolved, and it can only be dissolved by an individual attaining God realization. And so it is, I feel that we are closer and closer and closer to the attainment of the vision that I've always had, that we would all sit down in the presence of any form of error, get composed, get quiet within, and let the still small voice assure us, I will never leave you nor forsake you. As I was with Abraham, so I am with you. I will be with you unto the end of the world. And as those assurances come into our ears, material sense is dissolved. Material sense means that we can never again hate as much as we did before. We can never again be as sensual or sensuous as we were before. We never again can be as greedy, avaricious as we were before. We cannot be as fearful or doubtful as we were before, because all these are forms of material sense. In proportion as material sense is dissolved, fears, doubts, hates, jealousies, animosities, greeds, lusts, these disappear. But don't ever try to get rid of these. Just try to attain God realization and let that dissolve the substance of our forms. I'm sure that's clear now. I would like to tell you, well, let's for a moment get to this question here. How can one answer the statement that all metaphysics based on the Christian religion are negative, and so forth? Well, of course, I suppose that the best way of answering it would be to ask the person how many years they've studied it that has enabled them to come to this conclusion. And I think you'll find that you'd get an answer something like I did many years ago when I was practicing in New York. I was called to a hotel where a woman was supposedly dying, and they had no knowledge or faith in metaphysics, But after the doctor said there was no hope, then they were willing to try it as a last resort. And I went to this suite and sat with the lady for a little while, and then left. And all the relatives had gone down to the lobby so as to give me freedom in the apartment. When I got there, one of the men came up to me and asked if I would join them and talk with them a few moments. Yes, I thought they wanted me to comfort them, but this man very quickly assured me that that wasn't the case. He wanted to let me know that of course they knew that you couldn't expect any help in this direction because actually these diseases couldn't be healed. And I didn't answer, so he said, well, don't you agree with me? Or I said, well, don't you think that before we talk about that, we ought to speak at least for 5 minutes about the Copernican theory? Get that out of the way first? He looked at me. What was that? I haven't heard about that. You haven't heard about it? No. You don't know about it? No. Well, then why should that stop you talking about it? You don't know about the other either, about the healing of this disease. But you're all set and ready to talk to me about that. Oh, well, and that about ended that thing. And so it is, I find that with most people who want to discuss metaphysics, and I mean discuss it from a negative standpoint, from one of disbelief, that they're always discussing it from the standpoint of never having studied it. And that makes an impossible situation because no matter what you would answer back, they couldn't understand it, not having studied. That happened here not too long ago when somebody was going to publish one of our books, and one of the editorial writers sent me a couple of pages of corrections to make. Well, of course, I naturally asked the question, how many cases have you healed this year? None. Well, then how do you know about this? And that is usually the answer. You see, we're only dealing with two things. People who have honestly read and studied and who ask questions from interest, or they may not have studied, but they know you have, and they ask questions from interest. But the moment a person argues from any standpoint, it must be from ignorance. It can't be from enlightenment. For this reason, metaphysical healing has been going on now since 1875 on a large scale, and just before 1900, it was argued in every legislature in the United States, every state, medical and religious bills offered to outlaw metaphysical healing practice. And attorneys went before all state legislatures and proved the efficacy of metaphysical healing, so that metaphysical practitioners are licensed in every state of this union on the same basis as materia medica. You can charge the same prices if you like. If a patient dies under your treatment, you have only to call in the coroner and get a certificate of death for burial. You are in all respects on the same level of acceptance as the doctors who have studied for years and years and years, and so it must be very evident then that metaphysical healing practice isn't negative and isn't an escape, because it's actually therapeutic, it is actually curative, and so considered by all state legislatures and most of the foreign governments of the world. That's one aspect. Another aspect is there is hardly a prison in the United States, Canada, England, or its commonwealths where there aren't metaphysical workers, either of Christian Science or unity, working, and not only working with the consent of the wardens, but men like Warden Law have gone on record as saying that all prisoners come back the second, third, or fourth time, except those that find Christian Science, and they never come back. That's pretty good authority. But then there's a warden in San Quentin who has given that same opinion. And there are wardens in other states who will tell you, and when they speak of Christian Science, they usually mean metaphysics. They include unity and sometimes New Thought workers under that. You will find that wherever metaphysical workers have gone into prison, they are welcomed and given every opportunity for expansion, for work with the prisoners. That's not a negative approach to life. That's not an escape approach. That is a very positive approach. And now, since the advent of the Infinite Way, we have the wonderful experience of working with union and corporation cases on strikes, on settlements, on negotiations, where this work brings about peace, harmony in relationships, and there's nothing negative about that. So then, when people talk about metaphysics in a condemnatory sense, they're speaking without knowledge, unless they're speaking of some particular forms of it which have been failures. There's no doubt that there are branches of metaphysics which have not proven themselves and which have no record to back themselves up with. But when you take it on its broad basis, which would include Christian Science and some of the finer unity workers and the Infinite Way work, you don't have to ever be concerned about anyone finding these negative. As our old friend Al Smith used to say, let's look at the record. And you'll find that metaphysics has a very good record every time that it has come into responsible hands. And that answers that. And now I would like to call your attention to our friends over in England. And this is the April edition of the Science of Thought Review. First of all, they are starting a series of our articles. First time that these have appeared for some time in their magazine. And in this April issue, they're announcing Joel Goldsmith's New World Tour and calling attention to our work here at the Barbers and Plaza Hotel in New York, and then flying to London, Sweden, Holland, Germany, Switzerland, Cairo, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Durban, Cape Town, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and then back to Hawaii. And it is noted in here that arrangements have been made for Joel to speak at Caxton Hall, Tuesday and Wednesday, April 17th and 18th, and at the Hendon Truth Center, and then classwork. And then the editor has written a very beautiful article on the new edition of The Infinite Way. As a matter of fact, it's a 2.5-page article, and in this, I'm happy to note how Mr. Hamblin has not only caught but given to the readers all over the globe where his magazine reaches some of the points that we have covered here tonight. I'd like to read them to you. As promised, I am giving some more particulars of Joel Goldsmith's additional chapter to the new edition of The Infinite Way. Some readers may experience some difficulty in following him, but this need not be the case if they remember that Joel Goldsmith is speaking from the point of view of the absolute, that is, God as infinite perfection, wholeness, and completeness. Nothing has to be, but everything is. In addition to a number of very deep and cryptic sayings, Joel gives some hints on meditation. He says there are two stages of meditation serving two distinct purposes. The normal person lives a life entirely in the external, working, enjoying, and playing, physically and mentally. His laws are physical, mental, and legal. His instruction is from persons or books. At some period, he learns that the kingdom of God is within you, and an interest in this kingdom is awakened. Probably now he finds himself pondering the significance of the statement, the kingdom of God is within you. And this is his first meditation. As this meditation becomes a daily experience, an expansion of consciousness takes place. And as more and more of this infinite storehouse of wisdom, law, and power is revealed, he learns to depend less and less on outer forms of force, power, law, or knowledge. And so on, he mentions many of the points of the teaching. He comes down here to, here is another wise word, the crucifixion of the self is accomplished when there is nothing left for which we wish to pray. And so on and so forth. And then he gives, in this April edition, the monastic life, which we now have on the recordings. And the rest will follow in the months to come. And so it is that those who would like to follow these articles that will appear in England may, of course, order this Science of Thought review from Mr. Hamblin in Chichester, England. Beginning with the January issue, a magazine in India has started a series of 3 articles, of Infinite Way articles. I bring this to your attention so that you may see that the Infinite Way work is receiving recognition and acknowledgement in these foreign countries as well as in our own. And this alone should be our assurance that the message is doing something to those who comprehend it. Now I can say to you in all fairness that you can miss the way in the Infinite Way if you think of it as some way in which God will do something, get you something, or otherwise believe that you can turn to God for some form of good. You can miss the way in the Infinite Way, because that is not the nature of the teaching of the Infinite Way. It does not reveal a God that heals. It doesn't reveal a God that will send you supply. It doesn't reveal a God that will bring you companionship or happiness. It reveals God as omnipresence, so that we may come into the realization of God and let that realization live our lives. There, once you see this point, once you see that our sole goal is attaining a realization of God, if you like to say it, a demonstration of God, you will have the secret of the message of the Infinite Way. Because in achieving a realization of God, you will find that you will never have to take thought for health or wealth or companionship or loneliness or whatever else it is that should appear to make your experience harmonious. Nothing is necessary to us but God realization. Nothing will make for us a spiritually lived life, a spiritually endowed life, a spiritually maintained and sustained life Nothing will do this except the realization of Emmanuel, the realization of God with us, the realization of that still small voice uttering itself and dissolving material sense. And don't make the mistake of believing that this means it will dissolve the material sense of your friends or relatives or neighbors. Oh, no. No. We're a little fellow with material sense. Oh, yes. It dissolves the material sense through which we have been beholding our relatives and friends and neighbors. Yes, this realization of God's presence won't do anything to anyone else. It does it to us. And in turn, it helps to do it to those who bring themselves consciously within range of our consciousness. But don't forget this. Your nearest and dearest may be left in the very material sense that they seem to enjoy, while some utter stranger may be attracted and come to you for the blessing that you have received through God consciousness. But our concern is not to save the world. Our concern is not to dissolve material sense for you. Oh, no. No. Our thing is to realize God for me. And as I realize God for me, material sense is dissolved in me, and then I hate less and fear less and doubt less. I suffer less, and I enjoy more. And that's where my function ends, to dissolve material sense, because the material sense of me is the material sense of you. But I can't dissolve it for you except in proportion as you bring yourself into range of my consciousness. You will remember that Jesus did somewhat of a bad job on friend Judas. Wasn't a very good job the master did there. Certainly he dissolved material sense so far as he was himself concerned, and he dissolved material sense for those who could really permit themselves to be shorn of their material sense. But dear old Judas seemed to cling, even while claiming exemption and healing, he still clung to dear old material sense, so that when tempted in one way or another, he fell. So let us remember this, that our concern primarily is not with destroying material sense for our neighbors, but that material sense be destroyed in us. Then we have plenty of time, when those come to us seeking whatever light we have found, to let material sense be dissolved in them by virtue of their contact with us. Always remember that it is we ourselves who are on this path. We ourselves who must come to God realization. We are not responsible for our neighbors. We are not our brother's keeper in the sense of being responsible for his material sense. We are responsible for ours. Then we may be our brother's keeper in sharing the glory that we have found with those who desire it. And so I think it is that we have come to a glorious month of work in which the outstanding realization is that our attainment of God realization is the destruction of material sense, thereby removing its forms. Thank you until we meet again.